The Appalachian Mountains had always been a place of mystery and allure, their rolling hills and dense forests whispering secrets to those who dared to listen. For years, I'd heard tales of the unspoken rules that governed these lands, rules rooted in superstition and folklore. But like many, I dismissed them as mere stories, remnants of a bygone era. That was until I decided to venture into the heart of Appalachia, seeking solitude and inspiration for my next novel. I arrived in the small town of Pine Hollow just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the landscape. The town was quaint, with its wooden cabins and a single main street lined with local businesses. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, a refreshing change from the city's smog. At the local inn, I was greeted by Mrs. Thompson, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair neatly pinned up and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of countless stories. "Evening, dear," she said with a warm smile. "You must be Mr. Harris. We've been expecting you." "Please, call me Jack," I replied, returning her smile. "It's a pleasure to be here." She handed me an old-fashioned key attached to a wooden fob. "Room 3, up the stairs and to your right. Breakfast is at 7 sharp. And a word of advice, Jack, stick to the trails and be mindful of the time. The mountains can be unforgiving after dark." I chuckled, thinking she was playing into the local legends to entertain a city dweller like me. "I'll keep that in mind. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson." The room was modest but cozy, with a large window overlooking the vast expanse of the forest. As I unpacked, I couldn't shake the feeling that the trees were watching me, their silhouettes standing tall against the dimming sky. The next morning, armed with a map and a backpack filled with essentials, I set out to explore. The townsfolk were friendly but reserved, their conversations peppered with cautionary tales about the woods. One elderly man, Mr. Jenkins, pulled me aside as I passed the general store. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, his voice gravely with age. "No, sir. Just visiting," I replied. He nodded, his expression serious. "The mountains have rules, son, rules you best follow if you want to stay safe." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of rules?" He glanced around before leaning in closer. "If you hear your name called in the woods, no, you didn't. If you hear whistling at night, no, you didn't. And whatever you do, don't look at the trees too long. They have a way of looking back." I suppressed a smile, appreciating the local color. "I'll be careful. Thank you for the warning." The trail was well marked and winding through dense thickets and opening up to breathtaking vistas. The chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves created a symphony of nature, lulling me into a sense of peace. Hours passed unnoticed as I immersed myself in the beauty around me. As the sun began its descent, I realized I'd ventured farther than intended. The map indicated a shortcut back to town through a less traveled path. Against my better judgment, I decided to take it, eager to return before nightfall. The path was narrow, overgrown with foliage, and the canopy above thickened, allowing only slivers of the fading light to penetrate. The air grew cooler, and an unsettling silence enveloped the forest. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud against the hushed backdrop. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Jack!" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It had to be my imagination, perhaps the wind playing tricks or the distant call of an animal. I shook my head and pressed on, quickening my pace. "Jack?" The voice came again, more insistent this time. I spun around, scanning the trees for any sign of another person, but there was nothing, only the looming shadows and the oppressive silence. Mr. Jenkins' warning echoed in my mind. "If you hear your name called in the woods, no, you didn't." Determined to reach the safety of the town, I broke into a jog, the weight of my backpack jostling with each step. The path seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees closing in around me. Then, to my relief, I spotted a clearing ahead. Bursting through the underbrush, I found myself in a small meadow bathed in the soft glow of twilight. In the center stood an old, dilapidated cabin, its wooden beams weathered by time. Desperation overrode caution. I approached the cabin, hoping to find someone who could guide me back or at least offer shelter until morning. The door creaked open with a gentle push, revealing a sparsely furnished interior. Dust motes floated in the air, illuminated by the last rays of the setting sun. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the confined space. No response. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning underfoot. A fireplace dominated one wall, cold and filled with ash. A rickety table and a couple of chairs were the only other furnishings. On the table lay a journal, its leather cover cracked and faded. Curiosity piqued, I picked it up and flipped through the pages. The handwriting was elegant yet hurried, the ink smudged in places. One entry caught my eye. September 18th, 1923. They call to me, whispering my name from the shadows. I dared to answer once, and now they won't let me be. The trees, they watch, their eyes following my every move. I fear I've broken the rules, and now I'm trapped in their game. A chill ran down my spine. The date indicated the journal was over a century old, yet the feelings conveyed resonated with my current predicament. Suddenly, a soft melody filled the air, a haunting whistle that sent shivers through me. It was a tune I didn't recognize, melancholic and sweet, yet filled with an underlying menace. If you hear whistling at night, no, you didn't. Panic set in. I backed away from the table, my eyes darting to the windows. The last light of day had faded, and darkness pressed against the glass. The whistling grew louder, closer, wrapping around the cabin like a predator stalking its prey. I had to leave. Clutching the journal, I bolted out the door, the cold night air biting at my skin. The forest was now a labyrinth of shadows, the path I'd taken obscured by the encroaching darkness. The whistling followed, relentless and unerring, weaving through the trees with an unnatural persistence. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stumbled through the underbrush, branches clawing at my clothes. In my frantic escape, I tripped over an exposed root, the impact jarring the breath from my lungs. As I lay there, dazed, the whistling ceased, replaced by a deafening silence. Slowly, I pushed myself up, every muscle protesting. The forest seemed different. Alien. The trees stood taller, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes. The oppressive silence of the forest pressed in around me as I struggled to my feet, every muscle protesting from the fall. The journal I'd clutched lay a few feet away, its pages fluttering gently in the night breeze. I retrieved it, the leather cool against my trembling fingers, and shoved it into my backpack. The haunting whistling had ceased, but an unsettling feeling lingered, as if unseen eyes were observing my every move. I glanced around, trying to get my bearings. The path I'd been following was nowhere in sight, swallowed by the dense underbrush and the encroaching darkness. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I forced myself to take deep breaths, recalling the survival training I'd undergone years ago. Stay calm, assess your surroundings, and make a plan. The moon, partially obscured by drifting clouds, offered scant illumination. I decided to head downhill, reasoning that it might lead me to a stream or road. Each step was deliberate, the forest floor uneven and littered with roots and rocks. The nocturnal sounds of the woods seemed amplified, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the snapping of twigs underfoot. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a narrow trail, barely discernible beneath the tangled foliage. Relief washed over me. Any path was better than none. I followed it, the terrain gradually leveling out. The air grew cooler, and a faint mist began to curl around the bases of the trees, adding an ethereal quality to the surroundings. As I pressed on, a soft glow appeared ahead, flickering like a distant campfire. Hope surged within me at the prospect of finding other people. I quickened my pace, the light growing brighter with each step. But as I drew nearer, I realized it wasn't a fire at all. In a small clearing stood a series of orbs, hovering a few feet above the ground. They pulsed with a gentle, otherworldly light, shifting in color from pale blue to soft green. Mesmerized, I approached cautiously, recalling tales of the brown mountain lights, a phenomenon reported in the Appalachian region where mysterious lights appear without explanation. The orbs floated serenely, their illumination casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. I reached out a hand, hesitating inches from one of the lights, feeling a subtle warmth emanating from it. Suddenly, the orbs darted away in unison, zipping through the forest with uncanny speed. Startled, I watched as they disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone once more. The fleeting encounter left me both awed and unnerved. Were these the lights spoken of in local legends, or was my mind playing tricks on me in the stress of the situation? Determined to find my way back, I resumed my trek along the faint trail. The mist thickened, curling around my ankles like ghostly tendrils. The temperature continued to drop, and I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. Without warning, the path opened into another clearing, this one dominated by a massive oak tree, its gnarled branches stretching skyward like skeletal arms. At its base sat a stone well, partially covered in moss and ivy. An inexplicable sense of familiarity washed over me, as if I'd seen this place before. Approaching the well, I peered into its depths, but the darkness within was impenetrable. A sudden rustling behind me caused me to spin around, heart pounding. The forest remained still, the mist swirling lazily. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain. Silence. I turned back to the well, and to my astonishment, a figure now stood on the opposite side. Clad in tattered clothing with eyes that gleamed faintly in the dim light, the apparition regarded me with an inscrutable expression. "Who are you?" I demanded, taking a step back. The figure tilted its head as if contemplating the question. When it spoke, its voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm lost. Can you help me find my way back to Pine Hollow?" The apparition's eyes seemed to bore into mine, and for a moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow emanating from it. "The woods are not safe after dark," it murmured. "The rules were broken. Now, they come." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? Who comes?" Before the figure could answer, a distant sound reached my ears, a low melodic humming growing steadily louder. The apparition's eyes widened in fear. "You must leave," it urged. "They are drawn to those who break the rules." Without further explanation, the figure dissolved into the mist, leaving me alone by the well. The humming grew louder, resonating through the trees, setting my nerves on edge. I didn't wait to find out what was producing the sound. Turning on my heel, I sprinted back toward the trail, adrenaline fueling my movements. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches clawing at my clothes and face. The humming transformed into a cacophony of whispers, unintelligible, yet filled with malice. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pushed forward, desperate to escape whatever pursued me. In my frantic flight, I nearly collided with a wooden structure that loomed suddenly out of the fog, the same dilapidated cabin I'd encountered earlier. Without thinking, I dashed inside, slamming the door behind me and bolting it shut. The interior was just as I remembered, the cold fireplace and sparse furnishings offering little comfort. I pressed my ear to the door, listening intently. The whispers had ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence. Minutes stretched into eternity as I stood there, muscles tense, every sense on high alert. Gradually, I allowed myself to relax, sinking into one of the rickety chairs by the table. The journal I'd found earlier lay where I'd left it, a tangible connection to whoever had experienced these horrors before me. I opened it once more, flipping through the pages in search of answers. One entry stood out, dated September 21st, 1923. "They are relentless. The lights, the whispers, they are all connected. I fear there is no escape for those who have broken the rules. The forest punishes the transgressors, ensnaring them in a never-ending nightmare." A sense of dread settled over me. Was I doomed to the same fate as the journal's author? Had my ignorance of the unspoken rules sealed my destiny? A sudden thud against the cabin door jolted me from my thoughts. I leaped to my feet, heart racing. Another thud followed, then another, each impact more forceful than the last. The door creaked under the strain, the flimsy bolt threatening to give way. Desperation took hold. I scanned the room for any means of defense, but there was nothing, no weapons, no sturdy furniture to barricade the door. The windows were small and barred, offering no means of escape. The door groaned, splintering as whatever was outside continued its assault. I backed away, my mind racing. The journal's warnings echoed in my head, a litany of despair. The door shuddered under the relentless pounding, its hinges groaning in protest. Each thud reverberated through the cabin, sending jolts of fear coursing through me. Desperation clawed at my mind as I searched for an escape, but the barred windows and solid walls offered no solace. Suddenly, the assault ceased, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I strained to hear any sign of movement, but the only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. Minutes stretched into an eternity as I stood frozen, unsure whether to remain or flee. A faint whisper broke the silence, seeping through the cracks in the door. It was indistinct, a susurrus of voices intertwining, but one word emerged clearly: "Jack." My blood ran cold. The forest had called my name before, but this was different. Closer, more insistent. The warnings echoed in my mind. If you hear your name called in the woods, no, you didn't. Summoning every ounce of courage, I approached the door and pressed my ear against it. The whispering intensified, a chorus of voices repeating my name. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I forced myself to think rationally. I glanced around the cabin, my eyes landing on the cold fireplace. An idea sparked. If the chimney was wide enough, it might serve as an escape route. Without wasting a moment, I hurried to the hearth and peered up into the darkness. The chimney appeared narrow but passable. Removing my backpack, I secured it to my front and began the arduous climb, bracing my back against one wall and my feet against the other. The rough stones scraped against my skin and soot filled my lungs, but I pressed on, driven by the primal urge to survive. After what felt like an eternity, I emerged onto the roof, gulping in the cool night air. The forest stretched out before me, a sea of shadows under the pale moonlight. The whispering had ceased, replaced by an eerie stillness. Carefully, I descended the sloping roof and dropped to the ground, landing in a crouch. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew I needed a plan. Recalling the journal's mention of the Witch of the Woods, I wondered if the apparition I'd encountered by the well was connected to this legend. Perhaps seeking her out could provide answers. Steeling myself, I set off toward the well, retracing my steps through the dense underbrush. The forest seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the trees whispering secrets to one another. As I neared the clearing, a soft glow emanated from the well, casting long shadows across the ground. The apparition stood there, her form more defined than before. "You returned," she said, her voice a melancholic melody. "I need your help," I replied, keeping a respectful distance. "The forest is hunting me, and I don't know why." She sighed, her ethereal form flickering. "You broke the rules, Jack. The forest demands retribution." "What rules?" I asked, frustration tinging my voice. "No one told me anything." Her gaze softened. "The rules are unspoken, passed down through generations. To speak them is to invite the forest's wrath." "Then how am I supposed to know them?" I demanded. She stepped closer, her form shimmering in the moonlight. "Some things are learned through experience, through intuition. You must attune yourself to the forest, respect its boundaries." "Is there any way to make amends?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. She regarded me for a long moment before speaking. "There is a ritual, an offering to appease the spirits of the woods, but it is perilous, and there are no guarantees." "I'll do whatever it takes," I said firmly. "Just tell me what I need to do." She nodded. "At dawn, you must gather the following: a sprig of mountain ash, a feather from a raven, and a stone from the riverbed. Bring them here, and we shall proceed." "Why at dawn?" I asked. "The forest is less vigilant at first light," she explained. "Its power wanes with the rising sun." I nodded, committing her instructions to memory. "Thank you," I said earnestly. "I won't forget this." She offered a sad smile. "Be careful, Jack. The forest does not forgive easily." With that, she faded into the night, leaving me alone by the well. Determined to set things right, I set off to gather the necessary items, hoping that dawn would bring redemption. The first light of dawn filtered through the dense canopy as I made my way back to the clearing where the ancient oak and the moss-covered well stood sentinel. The forest, bathed in the soft hues of morning, seemed less menacing, but an undercurrent of unease still tugged at my senses. Clutched in my hands were the items the apparition had instructed me to gather: a sprig of mountain ash, a raven's feather, and a smooth river stone. As I approached the well, the ethereal figure materialized once more, her form shimmering in the gentle light. Her eyes, pools of sorrow and wisdom, met mine. "You have done well," she intoned softly, "but the ritual is fraught with peril. Are you certain you wish to proceed?" A knot tightened in my stomach, but I nodded resolutely. "I must make amends for breaking the rules. Tell me what I need to do." She extended a translucent hand toward the well. "Place the items within the well and recite these words: 'Spirits of the forest, I offer these gifts in penance. Forgive my transgressions and grant me safe passage.' Repeat this thrice." Taking a deep breath, I approached the well's edge and carefully dropped the sprig, feather, and stone into its depths. Their descent was swallowed by darkness, no sound marking their arrival at the bottom. With a steady voice, I recited the incantation 3 times, each repetition echoing eerily in the stillness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low hum emanated from the well, resonating through the ground beneath my feet. The air grew heavy, and the once gentle light of dawn seemed to dim, shadows lengthening unnaturally. The apparition's form flickered, her expression one of deep concern. "They are coming," she whispered. "You must not move, no matter what you see or hear. Stand firm and do not acknowledge them." Before I could ask who they were, she vanished, leaving me alone beside the well. The humming intensified, and from the periphery of my vision, I detected movement among the trees. Figures, indistinct and shadowy, emerged from the forest, their forms shifting and ethereal. They circled the clearing, their faces obscured, yet I felt their gaze upon me, a palpable weight that pressed against my very soul. Whispers filled the air, a cacophony of voices speaking in tongues long forgotten. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but I recalled the apparition's warning and remained rooted in place, my eyes fixed on the well. The figures drew closer, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. Images flashed in my mind, visions of the forest through the ages, of others who had stood where I now stood, seeking forgiveness or falling prey to the wood's wrath. The weight of their collective sorrow and fear bore down upon me, threatening to crush my resolve. Just as the pressure became unbearable, a sudden silence fell. The figures halted their advance, lingering at the edge of the clearing. The humming ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by the gentle sounds of the forest at dawn. The apparition reappeared before me, her form more solid than before, a faint smile gracing her lips. "You have faced the spirits and shown true remorse. The forest acknowledges your penance." Relief washed over me, my legs nearly giving way beneath me. "Is it over?" She nodded. "For now. Remember, the forest is alive, with its own will and consciousness. Respect its boundaries, honor its rules, and you shall remain in its good graces." I thanked her, gratitude swelling in my chest. "Will I see you again?" Her form began to fade, her voice a distant echo. "Perhaps in the whispers of the leaves and the songs of the wind. Farewell, Jack." With that, she vanished, leaving me alone in the clearing. The morning sun broke through the canopy, casting warm rays upon the forest floor. The weight that had burdened my heart lifted, replaced by a profound respect for the ancient woods and the spirits that dwelled within. As I made my way back to Pine Hollow, the events of the night played over in my mind. The forest had tested me, revealed its mysteries, and granted me a second chance. I vowed never to forget the lessons learned and to honor the delicate balance between humanity and nature. Little did I know, the forest's secrets were far deeper than I could have ever imagined, and my journey into its heart had only just begun. The relief of surviving the ritual was short-lived. I had escaped the immediate wrath of the forest, but I could still feel something lurking, watching, waiting. It was as if the woods had marked me, and my presence was now an intrusion rather than an accident. By the time I made it back to Pine Hollow, the town seemed different. The people moved slower, their eyes sunken, their skin a sickly shade of gray. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was as if something had drained them. The old man at the general store, the one who had warned me about the forest, barely lifted his head when I walked in. "You look like hell," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. His milky eyes met mine. "It's because of you." I froze. "What? The forest doesn't forget?" he rasped. "And it doesn't forgive." A thick silence followed. I suddenly felt cold, as if the store had no warmth left. I turned to leave, but the old man grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "You didn't fix anything," he whispered. "You only woke it up." I yanked my arm free and stumbled outside. My head pounded, my heartbeat erratic. The town looked off. The streets were empty. The air smelled damp and earthy, like rot after rain. I had to get out. I didn't pack. I didn't say goodbye. I just got in my car and drove. But the forest had other plans. The road twisted in ways it shouldn't have. My headlights flickered, the asphalt cracked, and then, just like that, the road was gone. Trees stretched endlessly in every direction. My car sat useless in the middle of a dirt path that shouldn't exist. My breath hitched. I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. From the corner of my eye, something moved. A figure. A woman. Eliza. But this wasn't the ghostly vision I had seen before. This thing was wrong. Her face was twisted, her mouth unnaturally wide, her eyes black pits of hunger. Her limbs stretched too long, fingers curling like talons. Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "You broke the rules." I scrambled out of the car, my mind screaming at me to run, but where? The forest was endless. I turned back to the car, only to find it sinking. The ground beneath it had turned to writhing, pulsing earth. The tires disappeared, then the doors, then the roof, swallowed whole like the forest was eating it. A wet, choking sound filled the air. The trees shuddered. The ground heaved. And I realized this wasn't just a forest. It was alive. Roots slithered across the ground, twisting toward me like fingers reaching for prey. The branches above groaned, their shapes forming faces, screaming, hollow-eyed faces trapped in the bark. "You must stay," the voice whispered, and my blood turned to ice. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to move. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but the whispers followed. The trees shifted, warping the path behind me. Every direction looked the same. Then I saw it. The well. It stood in the center of a clearing, but it was different now. Deeper, darker, a yawning mouth in the earth. From its depths, voices murmured. Hands, human hands, grasped at the edges, their fingers curling against the stone. And then I understood. The well wasn't just a place of offerings. It was a trap, a prison for something older than the town, older than the forest. And I had opened it. The hands clawed at the air, pulling themselves free. The first figure emerged, gaunt and eyeless, its mouth sewn shut with roots. Another followed, then another. They weren't ghosts. They were the ones before me, the ones who broke the rules, the ones who never made it out. And I was about to join them. I turned to run, but a root shot from the ground, wrapping around my ankle. I hit the earth hard, breath knocked from my lungs. My fingers clawed at the dirt, but the grip tightened, pulling me back. Back toward the well, back toward them. As I was dragged closer, Eliza stepped forward, her form flickering between the woman she had once been and the thing she had become. "Stay," she whispered, her voice filled with something ancient. "Stay with us." I screamed. Then, the darkness swallowed me whole, and Pine Hollow never saw me again.